Slap! The crack echoed beneath the crystal dome, a sharp, hollow sound that rolled across the ballroom. My cheek burned. My white dress cover shifted slightly to one side. The man who had just slapped me still had his finger pointed straight at my face. My older brother, Derek. "You are not welcome here." The entire ballroom went silent. No silverware, no glasses clinking, no conversations. No one stepped forward. No one tried to stop him. Slowly, I reached up and straightened my cover. I didn't touch my cheek. I didn't back away. I didn't strike back. 25 years in uniform had taught me one thing. Calm is always more powerful than anger. I looked Derek straight in the eye, without saying a word. 1 second, 2, 3. Then, bang! A chair scraped violently across the marble floor. Then another, then another. Within seconds, hundreds of chairs slid backward all at once. The sound thundered through the ballroom. The marble floor seemed to tremble beneath everyone's feet. I still hadn't turned around. I didn't have to. I already knew. 400 service members had just risen to their feet, and I knew something else. From that moment on, my mother's life would never be the same again. 25 years earlier, I walked out of my family's house carrying everything I owned inside a black trash bag. My mother looked at me and said, "This family doesn't waste food on dead weight." My father tried to get up. He wanted to stop me, but his illness wouldn't even let him make it to the front door. That night, I made myself a promise. One day, I would build a life where no one else got to decide what I was worth. What I didn't know was just how far that promise would take me. A violin drifted softly beneath the crystal ceiling of the grand ballroom. The chandelier shimmered across hundreds of champagne glasses. Rows of immaculate dress uniforms blended with tailored tuxedos and elegant evening gowns. Generals, admirals, defense executives, members of Congress, veterans, active duty service members. Families gathered together, talking quietly during the annual military gala, honoring those who had served and those still serving today. I stood outside the grand entrance for a few seconds. My hand tightened around my white dress cover. I drew one slow, steady breath. 25 years. 25 years since I walked out of that house. I never imagined I'd see my mother again. Especially here. I wasn't here for revenge. I had come for only one person. My father. I walked inside. The heels of my dress shoes clicked steadily against the marble floor. Almost immediately, a colonel near the entrance snapped to attention. A rear admiral gave me a respectful nod. Several younger officers quietly stepped aside, clearing a path without a word. I simply nodded back. I'd grown used to those looks over the years, not because of rank, because of responsibility. My eyes swept across the ballroom, searching for my assigned table. Then, I saw my father. He was sitting at one of the VIP tables near the front. His suit hung loosely on a body that illness had worn painfully thin. The shoulders that had once seemed unbreakable were now bent with age and disease. Both trembling hands rested on top of his cane. He was staring quietly into his glass of water. Everything around me faded away. The music, the conversations, the laughter. All I could see was the man who had reached for me as I walked out of that house 25 years ago. The only person who had never given up on me. I started walking toward him, then I heard it. A laugh. Sharp. Cold. Instantly familiar. The sound alone sent a chill crawling down my spine. I turned. My mother. She looked almost exactly the same as she had 25 years earlier. Her hair was perfectly styled. Her designer evening gown fit flawlessly. A diamond necklace sparkled beneath the ballroom lights. She was laughing with a circle of wealthy friends. Then her eyes landed on me. Her smile disappeared instantly. Her expression hardened. Not with emotion, with irritation. The exact same look she'd given me the day I told her I wanted to wear the same uniform my father had worn. I gave her the smallest nod. Nothing more than basic courtesy. Then I kept walking. But my mother had never been the kind of woman who let me leave on my own terms. A chair scraped sharply behind me. The rapid click of high heels echoed across the marble floor. She stepped directly into my path. The conversations around us began to die away. She looked me up and down. Her eyes stopped on my white dress uniform. The corner of her mouth curled into a smirk. "So, you're wearing a uniform now?" She laughed. The sound carried through the entire ballroom. Ever since she was a little girl, she's loved pretending to be the hero. I honestly thought after 25 years, she would have finally grown out of it. No one laughed with her. I said nothing. Because if I answered, I'd be giving her exactly what she wanted, a performance. But I wasn't that 18-year-old girl anymore. Just as I started to step around her, she raised her voice. Derek. My brother stood. A proud smile spread across his face as he walked toward me. Soon, less than 3 feet separated us. He looked me straight in the eye. You've got a lot of nerve showing your face here. I'm here for the gala. That was all I said. One sentence. Nothing more. It was my calm, more than anything else, that made Derek raise his hand. And the rest? You already witnessed at the beginning of this story. The sound of hundreds of chairs scraping across the marble floor was still ringing in my ears. But before I tell you what happened inside that ballroom, I need to take you back. Way back. Because no one becomes a stranger in their own family overnight. It starts with little things. So small that anyone looking from the outside would call them normal. But little by little, those moments pile up until they become an entire childhood. I grew up in a quiet suburb in Virginia. A 2-story house with a perfectly trimmed lawn. My mother loved perfection. Everything had to look beautiful. Beautiful enough for the neighbors to notice. Beautiful enough for every guest to compliment. Beautiful enough for everyone to believe the Barker family was something to admire. Almost every weekend, she hosted elegant gatherings. The dining table overflowed with expensive wine, imported cheeses, and catered food. Laughter always filled the living room. Everyone said my mother was charming. Everyone admired how successful she seemed. What no one ever saw was what happened a few minutes after the front door closed. The house became unbearably cold. My father had served in the Navy. He wasn't a man of many words. But whenever he put on his uniform, he carried himself as straight as an oak tree. When I was little, I'd sit on the staircase and watch him polish his shoes. He never rushed. Every movement was careful, deliberate. When he finished, he'd smile and gently pat my head. A uniform doesn't make you a good person, he used to say. It only reminds you that you have to live up to it. I didn't really understand those words back then, but I never forgot the way he looked when he said them. He was a man who believed in honor more than money. Then the illness came. At first, it was just a cough. Then, breathing became harder. Before long, more and more prescription bottles started appearing on the kitchen counter. As my father's health slowly faded, my mother's ambitions only grew. She joined exclusive social clubs, charity galas, fundraisers, business networking events. Those things became her priority. Far more important than sitting beside her husband in a hospital room. I still remember one winter evening. My father was sitting alone in the living room. A coughing fit hit him so hard he had to grab the armrest just to stay on his feet. The glass of water beside him had gone cold hours earlier. He reached for his medication, opened the bottle. Only a few pills remained. He stared at it for a long time, then quietly screwed the cap back on. No complaints. No anger. No resentment. That night, my mother walked into the room. She noticed the nearly empty prescription bottle. Then she said, almost casually, "We've got too many expenses this month. It can wait until next week." My father simply nodded. He never argued with her. I was standing behind the kitchen doorway, my hands clenched so tightly they hurt. The very next day, I watched my mother come home carrying a brand new designer handbag. That was the first time I truly understood something. Some people don't lack money, they lack compassion. They simply lacked priorities. In that house, Derek was the golden child. He studied business. Every achievement he earned became another story my mother proudly told her friends. Every bonus, every promotion, every milestone, she found a reason to celebrate. Vanessa was no different. She always knew exactly what my mother wanted to hear. She smiled at the right moments, sided with her in every disagreement, never challenged her. As for me, it seemed I could never get anything right. If I brought home straight A's, my mother said that was simply what she expected. If I finished second, she wanted to know why I wasn't first. If I took my father out for a walk, she said I was wasting my time. For years I tried to change. I learned the things she cared about. I wore the clothes she picked for me. I even practiced smiling the way she wanted. Eventually, I realized the truth. My mother didn't want a daughter. She wanted a mirror. Everything changed the year I turned 18. Derek came home with a job offer from a prestigious financial firm in New York. That night, champagne bottles were opened. My mother raised her glass. She looked happier than if she'd been offered the position herself. My father sat quietly in the corner. A violent coughing fit forced him to press a handkerchief against his mouth. When he lowered it, dark red stains marked the fabric. No one noticed. Or maybe, no one wanted to. I walked over to him, looked at my father, then looked at my mother. I have something I'd like to tell everyone. Every face turned toward me. I've decided to enlist. The champagne glass froze halfway to my mother's lips. Her smile disappeared. The room fell silent. I'm joining the Navy. I want to continue the path my father chose. My mother stared at me for several long seconds. Then she laughed. Not because she thought it was funny, near because she thought it was ridiculous. You want to end up like him? She pointed directly at my father. A man who spent his whole life serving, only to end up sick, drowning in prescriptions, and buried under medical bills? My father lowered his eyes. His thin fingers tightened around the arms of his chair. I looked at him, then back at my mother. For the first time in my life, I didn't lower my head. I don't want to spend my life chasing money. I want to live a life I'll actually be proud of. The room became so quiet, you could hear people breathing. What I didn't know was that within a matter of minutes, my life would change forever. No one in the room said a word. The grandfather clock continued its steady tick, tick, tick. In the corner, the soft hiss of my father's oxygen machine filled the silence. My mother stared at me for a long moment. That look told me everything. She didn't see what I just said as a career choice. To her, it was betrayal. Slowly, she set her champagne glass down. The crystal tapped against the tabletop with a quiet click. What did you just say? Her voice was calm, almost too calm. I'm enlisting. I'm joining the Navy. I want to live my own life. My mother gave a slow nod, a cold one. Then she turned to Derek. See? I told you this would happen someday. She was never going to amount to anything. Derek smirked, throwing her future away. Sounds exactly like my little sister. Vanessa remained silent. She lowered her eyes to the wine in front of her. She didn't object, but she didn't defend me either. That was what hurt the most about my sister. All those years, she had never been cruel to me, but she had never been brave enough to stand beside me either. She simply stayed quiet. And sometimes, silence cuts deeper than the cruelest words. My father pressed both hands against the arms of his chair. He struggled to stand. Patricia. He barely managed to say my mother's name before another violent coughing fit overtook him. His whole body folded forward. Dark red stains quickly spread across the white handkerchief in his hand. I ran to him. Dad! I caught his shoulders before he slipped. My mother glanced over, then looked away. Oh, stop the performance. The two of you are always trying to make everyone else feel guilty. I looked up at her. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at her with anger or resentment, only disappointment. Dad is sick. I know he is, she replied flatly. But that doesn't mean this entire family has to sacrifice its future. Then she turned and walked upstairs. The sharp click of her heels faded one step at a time. I thought it was over. I was wrong. Less than a minute later, my bedroom door flew open upstairs. Then came the clatter of metal hangers crashing together, drawers being yanked open, things hitting the floor. I froze. My father heard it too. He tried to stand. Don't. But his legs no longer had the strength. He collapsed back into the chair. Derek leaned against the staircase with his arms crossed, scrolling through his phone, smirking. Mom's just helping you pack. Saves you the trouble. A few minutes later, my mother came back downstairs. She was carrying a large black garbage bag. Everything I owned, my clothes, my books, my photographs, every little thing I'd collected over 18 years, had been shoved inside together. The bag had been tied in a hurry. The corner of a picture frame was still sticking out. It was the only family photo we had from before my father got sick. She walked straight toward me. Without the slightest hesitation, she threw the bag into my chest. The weight forced me back half a step. From this day forward, you are no longer my daughter. Her voice felt colder than the autumn wind waiting outside. If you want to live like a soldier, then go live out there. This family doesn't waste food on dead weight." The entire house fell silent. I looked at each face. Derek, still smiling. Vanessa, her lips tightened for a moment, but she still said nothing. My father, he was crying. Tears rolled quietly down his thin, weathered face. His trembling hand reached toward me. "Maya," he whispered. "Please." I walked over to him, knelt beside his chair, and took his frail hand in mine. For the first time, I realized the hands that had once carried me as a little girl had become frighteningly light. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I can't give this up." My father shook his head again and again. He squeezed my hand with what little strength he had left. Every word came with effort. "I'm not sorry." He drew a slow, painful breath. "Live, though you believe in." Those were the last words my father ever spoke to me before I walked out of that house. I stood, slung the garbage bag over my shoulder, walked past my mother. She never looked at me. She simply poured herself another glass of champagne, as if she'd just finished an ordinary chore. I opened the front door. A blast of cold, early autumn air rushed inside. I stepped off the porch. Behind me, I heard my father call my name one more time. But this time, he couldn't finish. A violent coughing fit swallowed the rest of his words. I stopped walking. My hands tightened around the straps of the garbage bag. All I had to do was turn around, say I was sorry. Maybe she'd let me stay. But then I remembered the look in my father's eyes when he told me, "Live the life you believe in." So I kept walking. The street was dark. The streetlights cast weak pools of yellow across the sidewalk. Every step felt like I was dragging lead behind me. I had no idea where I was going to sleep. No idea what I'd eat the next day. No idea whether I even had enough money to make it through the week. There was only one thing I knew for certain. The moment that front door closed behind me, an 18-year-old girl lost her family. But that same night, a future service member took her first step into existence. I walked for nearly 3 hours. Eventually, I spotted the flickering neon sign of an old motel beside the Greyhound bus station. I spent almost every dollar I had left on the cheapest room they offered. The place smelled of mildew. The mattress sagged in the middle. A dim yellow light buzzed overhead. I set the garbage bag on the floor, untied it. My clothes were wrinkled. Several of my books had torn covers. The family picture frame was cracked across one corner. I sat down on the edge of the bed, pulled the photograph into my arms, and for the first time in hours, I cried. Not because I'd been thrown out, but because I had finally understood something that would stay with me for the rest of my life. Some people are born into the same family, yet never truly have a home. That first night in that tiny motel room, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father doubled over, coughing in the living room. I heard the garbage bag hitting my chest. I heard my mother's voice. "This family doesn't waste food on dead weight." Around 5 the next morning, the rumble of a truck outside my window jolted me awake. I sat up. The room was so cold I could see my breath. I opened my wallet, counted what little cash I had left, then counted it again. At the rate I was going, I'd be completely broke in less than a week. I put on my old jacket and spent the morning walking from one business to another, looking for work. The first place said no. The second told me they only hired people with experience. The third never even looked up from the counter. By almost noon, I walked into a small family diner owned by an older Greek couple. The woman behind the counter looked to be in her 50s. Heavyset. Serious. She looked at me, then down at my worn-out shoes. "Looking for a job?" I nodded. "Know how to wash dishes?" "I learn fast." She didn't ask another question. She simply handed me an apron. "Then start now." That was my first job after being thrown out of my own home. Every morning, I showed up before 5. I washed hundreds of plates, dozens of heavy stock pots. The hot water left blisters across my hands. The detergent split the skin on my fingertips. Some nights, I couldn't even feel my fingers anymore. But I never complained. At the end of every shift, the head cook would quietly leave a hot takeout container on the counter. He never said a word. Neither did I. I'd simply nod and thank him. Some acts of kindness don't need speeches. They just need to arrive at exactly the right moment. I started saving every dollar. No new clothes, no coffee, No bus fare. I walked everywhere. Every single dollar had a purpose. 1 month later, I found myself standing outside a Navy recruiting office. The glass door reflected a skinny 18-year-old girl, hair pulled back neatly, dark circles beneath her eyes, but for the first time, there wasn't any fear in them. The recruiter studied my paperwork for a long time. Then he looked up. "Does your family support this decision?" I was quiet for a few seconds. "No." He nodded. He didn't ask another question. Maybe. He'd met people like me before. He slid the enlistment papers across the desk. "If you sign this, your life isn't going to be easy." "I know. Then why do you still want to do it?" I looked at the American flag hanging behind him. Then I thought about my father. "Because I need a place where my worth isn't decided by someone else." A faint smile crossed his face. It was the first genuine smile anyone had given me in months. I signed my name. My hand never shook. From that moment on, I wasn't the girl who had been thrown out of her home anymore. I was a recruit in the United States Navy. On my first day at boot camp, I realized almost immediately that I was the smallest person there. Around me stood towering men. Women who had been college athletes. Some had played football. Some had been volunteer firefighters. Others came from families that had served for generations. And me? I was just a girl who'd been living in the cheapest motel she could afford. During our first physical fitness assessment, I finished near the back. I heard quiet laughter behind me. "She won't last a week. I give her 3 days." 1 week? $50 says she quits before then. That night, inside the barracks, I listened as they actually started collecting bets. One recruit tossed his campaign cover onto the floor to hold the money. They were betting on the exact day I'd quit. I lay quietly on my top bunk, staring at the ceiling. I didn't say a word, because this wasn't the first time. People had bet against me. The next morning, the whistle blew at 4:30 a.m. We ran, did push-ups, pull-ups, carried heavy loads, crawled through mud, heat, sweat, constant yelling. Everything blurred together. By the end of the day, my arms were shaking so badly I could barely hold a spoon. That night, I sat alone in the hallway outside the barracks. For the first time, I asked myself a question I never wanted to ask. What if my mother was right? Maybe I really wasn't strong enough. Just then, an older man slowly walked toward me. He wore the uniform of a Navy chaplain. Most of his hair had turned silver. One leg carried a slight limp. Without saying a word, he lowered himself onto the bench beside me. He didn't ask my name. He didn't ask about my family. He simply stared out across the dark training grounds. For a long while, neither of us said anything. Finally, he broke the silence. "You know, people in the military often think the strongest person is the one who runs the fastest." A faint smile crossed his face. "They're wrong. The strongest person is the one who gets back up after everyone else has already decided they're finished." I turned to look at him. Slowly, he rose to his feet. Before walking away, he left me with a single sentence. "Don't let someone else decide how your story ends." Then he was gone. His silhouette slowly disappeared beneath the glow of the yellow lights. I sat there for a long time. Eventually, I lowered my eyes to my blistered hands. For the first time, I stopped thinking about proving my mother wrong. Instead, I started thinking about something far more important. Proving that I was worthy of the life I had chosen for myself. The next morning, when the wake-up whistle echoed across the base, I was the very first recruit to step onto the training field. The wake-up whistle shrieked at 4:30 a.m. The barracks were still dark. Most of the recruits were still in bed. I'd already finished getting dressed. It wasn't because I worked harder than everyone else. It was because I knew something. If I only did what everyone else did, someone would always say, "She only made it because she got lucky." I checked every weapon on the inventory list, wiped every speck of dust from the optics, counted every box of ammunition. When Sergeant Logan walked into the armory, he stopped in his tracks. "Barker." "Yes, Sergeant." "Who told you to do all this?" "No one." He looked around the room. Everything was spotless, perfectly organized. He simply nodded. "Keep it up." It was the first time he'd ever spoken to me like a normal human being. No yelling, No sarcasm, no longer treating me like the girl everyone expected to quit after 3 days. 3 months later, our unit was assigned to escort a supply convoy. Nothing high profile, just a routine mission that was supposed to take a few hours. Mendoza climbed into the lead vehicle. As he buckled his seatbelt, he pulled a photograph from his chest pocket. "Your daughter again?" I asked. He grinned. "She just lost her first tooth." I looked at the picture. A little girl with the biggest smile, a tiny gap where her front tooth used to be. "She's adorable." Mendoza slipped the photo back into his pocket. "I promised her I'd be home for her birthday this year." I shut the vehicle door. "Then you'd better keep that promise." He flashed me a thumbs up. "Count on it." The convoy rolled out of the base at 8 that morning. Something felt wrong. I looked out the window. The road was empty. No civilians, no children, no barking dogs, only the wind. I picked up the radio. "Mendoza, yeah? You seeing what I'm seeing?" "Too quiet." Before I could answer, the world exploded. A deafening blast ripped through the road. The lead vehicle was thrown into the air. The shockwave hurled dirt and twisted metal into the convoy behind it. "IED!" The shout echoed over the radios. Gunfire erupted from both hillsides. Everyone moved into defensive positions. I jumped out of the vehicle, searching for cover and returning fire. Then I heard someone scream, "Barker! It's Mendoza!" I spun around. The armored door of the lead vehicle had crushed his leg. Black smoke poured into the sky. Flames were already spreading through the cab. A soldier grabbed my arm. "Don't! That truck's about to blow." I looked at Mendoza. He looked back at me. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't begging for help. He simply shook his head. The message was unmistakable. "Don't come back." Then I remembered the picture of the little girl tucked inside his pocket. And I ran. The first round struck the pavement just inches from my boots. The second ripped past my helmet. I ran anyway. Dropped to one knee. Wrapped both hands around the twisted armored door. It didn't move. "I need another pair of hands." No one came. The rest of the team was pinned down, returning fire. If they abandoned their positions, the entire convoy would be exposed. I shifted my footing, planted both boots against the road, poured every ounce of strength I had into the door. Metal screamed. It lifted just a few inches. "Mendoza, pull your leg out!" He clenched his jaw. Blood soaked through his pant leg. "I'm stuck." I took one deep breath, then pushed again. Harder, this time. The door rose just enough. "Enough." "My arm," he shouted. I grabbed the drag handle on the back of his body armor and pulled. 1 yard. 5. 10. Every step felt as though I were dragging the entire truck behind me. The instant we dove behind a concrete barrier, the vehicle exploded. The blast wave threw us both to the ground. Mendoza woke up 3 days later in the field hospital. His left leg was wrapped in a cast. Bandages covered most of his body. He spotted me standing outside the tent. "My daughter is Shun." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the small photograph I'd taken from his uniform, then placed it on the bedside table. "She's still waiting for you." Mendoza smiled, tears rolled quietly toward his temples. I thought I wasn't going to get another chance. Honestly, so did I. He looked at me for a long time. "Barker, thank you." I shook my head. "I didn't save you. I just helped you keep a promise." "What promise?" "You still have to take your little girl to the beach." Mendoza laughed. It was the first real laughter anyone had heard inside that hospital tent in days. 3 months later, our unit was assigned to locate a reconnaissance team that had gone silent. The terrain was brutal. Jagged rock formations, narrow canyons, radio signals faded in and out. Our platoon leader was wounded within the first few minutes. The highest-ranking person still in command was Sergeant Logan. He studied the map while trying to raise headquarters over the radio. Just then, a burst of rifle fire sliced across the mountainside. "Sniper?" Everyone scattered for cover. A young soldier panicked and bolted from behind his rock. "Miller!" Logan shouted, "Get back!" But Miller wasn't hearing anything anymore. If he kept running, he'd step straight into the open between 2 rock formations. I scanned the terrain, then the position of the sun, then the ridgeline above us. "It's not one sniper," I said. "There are 2. Logan whipped around. "You sure?" I caught 2 separate scope glints. He stared at me for exactly 1 second, then nodded. "What's your plan?" I knelt down, used the tip of my combat knife to sketch a quick diagram in the dirt. If we all move together, they'll trap us in the kill zone. Harris and I swing left. Mendoza lays down suppressive fire. The other two pull Miller back. Logan studied the drawing, then looked at me. He didn't change a single thing. Do it Barker's way. The team moved immediately. No hesitation. 3 minutes later, Miller was safely behind cover. Both snipers were forced to withdraw after losing their firing angles. No one else in the unit was injured. When it was over, Logan folded the map. He looked at me for a long moment. Today, I wasn't the one making the decisions. You were. I shook my head. You gave the orders. Logan smiled. Maybe, but you're the reason I trust myself enough to give them. After that day, whenever we were about to step into a mission and Logan asked, "Anybody see something I don't?" Every set of eyes in the unit turned toward me first, not because of my rank, because they trusted Maya Barker to lead. A week later, the unit assembled before deployment. The morning was unusually quiet. Sergeant Logan stepped in front of the formation. He looked down the line, then stopped in front of me. Without saying a word, he removed the unit insignia from his own uniform, the same insignia he'd worn for nearly 20 years. He pinned it onto my chest pocket. You've earned it. I stood speechless. Sergeant, he raised a hand, stopping me. On your first day here, I bet you'd quit. I was wrong. Then he held out his hand. For the first time, he shook mine, not because regulations required it, not because of rank, but out of genuine respect. At that moment, Harris nudged Mendoza with his elbow. Remember that betting pool? Oh, I remember. Harris reached into his pocket, pulled out a worn $50 bill, and handed it to me. It's yours. Why? That's the money I won. I bet you'd never quit. The whole formation laughed. I looked at the bill, then handed it back. Keep it. Take Mendoza's daughter out for ice cream. Nobody said another word. But after that morning, no one ever called me the weakest recruit in the unit again. From then on, they called me by my name. Maya Barker. The 5th of every month. It didn't matter whether I was stationed stateside or at a remote outpost in the middle of the desert. There was one thing I always did. I opened my laptop, logged into my bank account, and checked a single automatic transfer. The recipient never changed. Blue Ridge Home Medical Services, a private home healthcare company that had been caring for my father. The payments had been set up years earlier. Nothing was connected to my name. Nothing could be traced back to the Barker family. Not even my father knew where the money came from. He believed he'd been accepted into a veterans assistance program. I wanted it to stay that way, because if my father ever found out, he would spend every ounce of strength he had trying to refuse it. That was who he was. He would rather suffer himself than ever become someone else's burden. My secure phone vibrated just before midnight. I glanced at the caller ID. Virginia. I answered immediately. Dad. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then I heard the familiar sound of his breathing. Maya. Just hearing his voice made the weight of the entire day disappear. How are you feeling? I'm doing all right. I couldn't help smiling. You've never once answered that honestly. He chuckled. The laugh was quickly swallowed by a long, painful coughing fit. My grip tightened around the phone. Dad. You were in the hospital again, weren't you? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence told me everything. After a long pause, he quietly changed the subject. You still have that first letter I wrote you? My hand instinctively touched the breast pocket of my uniform. It was still there, sealed inside a thin plastic sleeve to protect it from wear. I still have it. If the day ever comes, when I'm gone, don't throw it away. Before I could respond, I heard a door open on his end. Then, my mother's voice. Frank? What are you doing? My father lowered his voice immediately. I have to go. Don't worry about me. Take care of yourself. The line went dead. I looked at the call timer. 3 minutes, 17 seconds. It was the longest conversation my father and I had shared in nearly 10 years. 3 years later, I was promoted. The ceremony was held at a naval base. The auditorium was packed. One by one, officers stepped forward with their families. One mother pinned her son's new rank onto his shoulders herself. One father wrapped his daughter in a hug so tight he broke down in tears. Cameras clicked non-stop. I stood behind the curtain, looking toward the family seating section. There was one chair, a small sign rested on it. Barker family. No one was sitting there. The ceremony coordinator walked over. "Sir, if your family isn't coming, we can ask another officer to perform the promotion." I nodded. "That'll be fine." The ceremony unfolded just like every other one. A colonel stepped forward, pinned my new rank onto my shoulders, shook my hand, posed for the official photographs. Everything was flawless, except for one thing. Out of the hundreds of pictures taken that day, not a single one included a member of my family. 2 months later, the head nurse at Blue Ridge Home Medical Services called me. "I think you should know something." "What happened?" "Your father declined a new treatment plan." "Why?" "He said it was too expensive." I closed my eyes. "He still can't know about the payments." "I understand. But he keeps saying he doesn't want to spend a stranger's money." I sat there in silence. That was my father. Always worrying about everyone else before himself. "I'll take care of it." The next morning, I prepaid the entire following year's care. I wasn't going to let him spend another day worrying about the cost. 14 years into my military career, I finally had 48 hours of leave. I drove back to Virginia, but I never went to the house. Instead, I parked across the street. From a distance, I watched my father sitting on the front porch. Bet he looked so much thinner. An oxygen tank rested beside his old wooden chair. A worn paperback lay open in his hands. Every few moments, he'd look up toward the road, as though he were waiting for someone. I wanted to get out of the car. I wanted to run across the street and hold him. But just then, my mother stepped outside. She placed a shopping bag into the car, then called my father back inside. My hand tightened around the steering wheel. In the end, I quietly started the engine. I couldn't take my father home. Not yet. 11 years later, I walked into my new office. My executive assistant placed a cream-colored envelope on my desk. "Admiral, this invitation was delivered directly to you." I opened it. It was an invitation to the National Veterans Honor Gala, an event reserved for distinguished guests. Attached was the official guest list. I turned the pages until my fingers stopped. Retired Colonel Frank Barker, my father. Directly beneath his name. I read it again. A feeling I couldn't quite describe settled over me. For 25 years, my mother had insisted that the military brought nothing but suffering, and now she was using my father's rank to walk into the very world she'd spent her life longing to be part of. A knock sounded at the door. Mendoza stepped inside. His eyes landed on the invitation. "Something wrong?" I handed it to him. He read it slowly, then looked back at me. "I don't think this is just another gala anymore." I gave a quiet nod. "No. It's time." That evening, I opened my closet, took out the white dress uniform I hadn't worn in years. I carefully polished every medal, every button, every detail. Then I stood in front of the mirror. The reflection looking back at me was no longer the 18-year-old girl carrying a black garbage bag out of her childhood home. It wasn't just an admiral either. It was a daughter, finally getting ready to bring her father home. The ballroom glowed beneath towering crystal chandeliers. Soft jazz drifted through the air, blending with the conversations of hundreds of distinguished guests. I stepped through the grand entrance. The heels of my dress shoes echoed steadily across the marble floor. Almost immediately, a colonel near the entrance snapped to attention. A rear admiral offered a crisp salute. Several younger officers instinctively stepped aside, clearing a path. I acknowledged them with nothing more than a slight nod. I didn't stop. I wasn't looking for attention. My eyes were fixed on one place, the VIP table near the front. My father. He looked so much thinner. The suit hanging from his shoulders seemed 2 sizes too large for the man who had once looked indestructible. He slowly lifted his head. The glass of water in his hand trembled. "Maya?" No sound escaped his lips. He didn't need to say it. I could read the word in the way they trembled. I started walking toward him. Then, a sharp, familiar laugh sliced through the room behind me. Well, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. My mother stepped into the center of the aisle. She smiled the way someone smiles at an uninvited guest. "Maya, you're still wearing that uniform," I answered calmly. "I'm here for the gala." She let out a loud, theatrical laugh. The sound carried far enough that nearby conversations stopped. Then she turned toward the circle of wealthy guests around her. 25 years ago, this girl walked out on her own family. She always believed putting on a uniform would somehow make her important. She rested a hand proudly on Derek's shoulder. This is the real pride of our family. My son, he built his success with talent. Unlike her. All she ever learned was how to carry a gun. No one laughed. The silence lingered. For the first time, my mother's smile faltered. Derek stepped forward. If you know what's good for you, you'll walk out of here on your own. I met his eyes. I came here because I was invited. Not because I needed your permission. Derek's jaw tightened. Then, without warning, he swung. Slap. The crack echoed through the entire ballroom. My left cheek burned. My white dress cover shifted slightly out of place. Slowly, I reached up and straightened it. I didn't touch my face, I didn't step back, I didn't strike him back. Derek pointed a finger directly at me. You don't belong here. I looked at him, calmly. Are you finished? Those 4 quiet words left the entire ballroom in absolute silence. Bang. One chair scraped backward, then 10, then hundreds. In less than 2 seconds, more than 400 service members rose to their feet. The thunder of chairs echoed through the ballroom. Master Chief Collins strode forward. 2 security officers immediately seized Derek's arms. Get your hands off me. Derek struggled against them. She's my sister. Master Chief Collins looked him straight in the eye. No, tonight, she's your admiral. And the admiral of every service member in this room. Derek froze. Security forced him back against one of the marble columns. For the first time, the arrogance disappeared from his face. Replaced by panic, a deep voice broke the silence. Let me. James Crawford stepped forward, leaning on a cane. He slowly opened his hand. An old challenge coin caught the light. I've carried this coin for 14 years. 14 years ago. My heart stopped in a parking lot. People stood there and watched. Only one person ran toward me. He turned to me. She performed CPR. Compression after compression. Until she broke my ribs. He smiled. That's right. She broke my ribs, and that's exactly what kept my heart beating. He placed the challenge coin into my hand. I've been searching for you for 14 years. Today, I finally get to thank the woman who saved my life. James Crawford stepped back, still standing at attention. The challenge coin rested quietly in my palm. Then, Mendoza rose to his feet, leaning on his cane. I'd like to say something. The entire ballroom turned toward him. He looked at Derek, then at my mother. The day my vehicle exploded, I was trapped inside. Everyone believed I wasn't coming out alive. He drew a slow breath. Maya came back for me. She dragged me out of a burning vehicle. Without her, my daughter would have grown up without a father. No one spoke. Then Harris slowly stood. I was one of the guys betting she'd quit. I lost. A small smile crossed his face. Actually, all of us lost. Because Maya Barker has never quit. Not once. A Navy corpsman stood from the back of the room. I treated her in the field. She had just donated blood to save another service member. 10 minutes later, she was back on her feet checking on every other casualty before herself. That's who she is. An elderly veteran with silver hair slowly rose, leaning on a cane. I served with her father. Today, I've had the honor of seeing the woman he raised. Then another veteran stood. She led my team out of an ambush. Another, she was always the last one to leave the battlefield. Another, she never left anyone behind. One after another, they stood. No one exaggerated. No one recited medals. No one talked about glory. They simply told the truth. The truths Maya Barker had never spoken about herself. In less than a minute, more than 100 veterans were standing. Then, the rest of the guests slowly rose with them. No one asked them to. No announcement was made. The entire ballroom stood together, not to honor a rank, but to honor a person. The champagne glass slipped from my mother's hand. It shattered across the marble floor. She staggered backward. Without realizing it, she gripped the edge of the tablecloth. It pulled loose. Wine glasses, china plates, silverware. One after another, they crashed onto the floor. The sound of breaking crystal echoed through a ballroom that had become completely silent. The woman seated beside my mother quietly picked up her purse and walked away. A defense executive adjusted his jacket, nodded respectfully to James Crawford, then moved to another table. The congressman who had been laughing with my mother only minutes earlier turned his back without saying a word. No one looked at her anymore. No one wanted to stand beside her anymore. For the first time in her life, my mother understood what it felt like to be the one left behind. She looked at me. Her lips trembled. Maya. I walked toward her. Stopped exactly an arm's length away. The day you threw me out, you said, "This family doesn't waste food on dead weight." I held her gaze. I didn't come here tonight to prove you were wrong. I came here to take my father home. I walked past her without looking back. Behind me, there was no laughter anymore. No clinking glasses, no conversation. Only a woman standing alone, surrounded by broken crystal. As the empire she had built on pride collapsed beneath the weight of the truth. The ballroom remained absolutely silent. No one was looking at Derek anymore. No one cared about his desperate attempts to explain himself. Every eye had turned toward my father. He was still sitting quietly. His frail hands rested on top of his cane. His eyes shimmered with tears. I walked over to him, then knelt in front of his chair. 25 years earlier, those same hands had reached for me as I walked out of our house. Today, I gently took them in mine. Dad. His voice broke. Maya, is all of this real? I smiled. Yes. I came home to take you with me. A tear slipped onto the back of my hand. I thought I'd never see you again. I made you a promise. I told you I'd live the life I believed in. Tonight, I'm here to keep the last promise I ever made you. I helped him to his feet. He felt so light, yet with every step he fought to stand as straight as he could, just like the naval officer he had once been. The moment my father and I turned to leave, a command rang through the ballroom. Attention! 400 service members snapped to attention as one. The sharp thunder of polished heels striking marble echoed through the hall. James Crawford was the first to raise his salute. Master Chief Collins followed. Mendoza, leaning on his cane. Harris, the admirals, the colonels, the veterans, one after another. Every hand rose in salute. No one had ordered it. No one needed to. They chose to. Slowly, the rows of service members stepped apart. An honor corridor opened through the center of the ballroom. My father stopped walking. He looked around him, his eyes filled with tears. Then he turned to me. Are they saluting you? I shook my head. A small smile crossed my face. No, Dad. They're saluting the man who taught me how to be a soldier. Long before I ever put on this uniform. He froze. His eyes drifted to my white dress uniform, then to his own hands. The same hands that had polished my military shoes on the morning I left for boot camp. He pressed his lips together. Tears quietly rolled down his cheeks. For the first time in my life, I saw my father cry, not because he was hurting, but because he was proud. The moment we took our first steps, James Crawford never lowered his salute. Mendoza stood at attention despite leaning on a cane. Harris stood just as straight. Then, someone started clapping. No one ever knew who it was. A second pair of hands joined in, then a third. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted into sustained applause. Generals, admirals, veterans, military families, business leaders, every single person rose to their feet, not to honor a rank, but to honor a life built on courage, sacrifice, and dignity. My father stopped walking. He turned and looked across the ballroom. His shoulders trembled, his voice caught in his throat. I always told you, a uniform doesn't make the person. He looked at me. Today, you've proven me wrong. I gently shook my head. No, Dad, I've only proven that you were right. A uniform doesn't make the person. It simply tells the world how that person chose to live. My father broke down. This time, he didn't try to hide it. He wrapped his arms around me. There, in the middle of an honor corridor formed by 400 service members, while the applause continued to echo around us, my father and I shared our first embrace in 25 years. At the far end of the ballroom, my mother was still standing, exactly where we'd left her. The shattered champagne glass lay at her feet. The tablecloth still hung crooked. broken crystal sparkled beneath the chandeliers. She watched us walk away. No one walked toward her. The woman who had been sitting beside her quietly picked up her purse and left. The defense executive who had been toasting with her only minutes earlier nodded respectfully to James Crawford, then turned and walked away. A congressman silently pulled out his chair and moved to another table. With every passing moment, the empty space around my mother grew larger. She stood alone in the middle of the ballroom. For the first time in her life, there was no status, no admiration, no flattering voices, no one left who wanted to stand beside her. I never looked back, because some truths don't need another word. 3 months later, my father came to live with me. It was a small house overlooking a quiet lake. There were no housekeepers, no lavish dinner parties, just a wooden porch, 2 rocking chairs, and the smell of fresh coffee every morning. My father usually sat outside reading the newspaper. I took care of the little garden. One morning, I placed the challenge coin on the table in front of him. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands for a long time, then smiled. I used to think honor lived in rank. He looked at me. I was wrong. Honor lives in the way you treat other people. I smiled back. I learned that from you, Dad. He didn't answer. He simply gave the smallest nod. 1 year later, my father passed away peacefully. On the nightstand beside his bed was one last letter addressed to me. The thing I regret most is that I couldn't protect you inside my own home. The thing I'm proudest of is that you never let your kindness die. Thank you, because in the end, you brought me home. I folded the letter carefully, then placed it beside the very first letter he'd ever written to me. One letter had begun my journey. The other had gently closed the story of his life. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Mendoza. My little girl wants to know when you're finally going to keep your promise. I laughed. Which promise? Taking her to the beach. I looked up at the clear blue sky. This weekend, I'll be there. I stepped out onto the porch. An early autumn breeze drifted through the trees. This time, I wasn't walking forward to prove my mother wrong. I kept walking, because at last, I had a place to come home to. And the father who had spent so many years waiting for me had finally made it home with me.